Graduated, elevated, now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time, non-stop.
Hello and welcome to PhD Hard Talk. My name is Noma Mguni and this is Professor Mpofu. Could you please introduce yourself and your abstract and then we can crack on?
Hi, my name is Mpofu, as Noma had said, and I'm an Associate Professor of Media and Communication in Society at the University of South Africa, Africa's largest university, by the way. I research in media and communication, and my focus really is on issues around identity, mainstream media, new media, and digital technologies, and how they sort of interface with many aspects and facets of our lives as human beings. I also look at issues around violence, issues around gender and stuff, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that introduction. So corrections to me, Associate Professor. So we're just going to discuss your abstract, which is The Art of Journalism in Zimbabwe, the case of Owen Maseko's banned Zimbabwean genocide exhibition. I mean, could you take us through that? What is it and why was it banned?
Owen Maseko did an exhibition on the Kukuraundi genocide, a genocide that happened in Zimbabwe in the 1980s. From right around 1982 to about 1983, 84, thereabouts. So there's never been an open conversation on the genocide in Zimbabwe, the genocide that happened, where a largely Shona-speaking army was involved in it was a crack military outfit. It was not part of the mainstream army. So they went into the southwestern parts of Zimbabwe, in Matabeleland, the Midlands, and killed people, basically, and some were being killed largely because of being Ndebele or being alleged to be supporters of PF Zapo. So the killings took an ethnic or a tribal dimension because of the composition of the army, and also partly because of what they were saying to their victims. In excess of 20,000 people were killed in the process, and during that time there was information blockade, so the rest of the world, and indeed the rest of the country, didn't know what was going on, even though a few journalists got to know what was going on, and of course a few international journalists also got to know what was going on. So the exhibition by Owen Maseko sought to depict, and this was from his experience anyway, sought to depict that kind of genocide. So in this abstract, I'm actually looking at Owen Maseko as an artist, also as a storyteller, and as doing some journalistic work through art. Right, and we would consider that, and concede definitely, that journalism cannot be defined using rigid sort of boundaries, that this is journalism or this is not journalism. We can say that journalism is almost like pornography. Everyone knows what it is, but no one can really define. So this is what I say in the paper. There's actually a citation from a scholar who actually suggests that journalism is like pornography. We know it when we see it, but it's difficult to define, right? So journalism is almost like that, to an extent that even artists can do journalistic work. And so what I'm looking at is how Owen Maseko tells his story to the audiences, and I go on to discuss the effects of that, and also the interpretations and perceptions of readers of his art. So the art gets banned. It was installed, I think, at night and in the morning, when people were passing by the Bulawayo Art Gallery. They were sort of exposed to this interesting sort of installation. And a few hours later, a few minutes later, since morning, the state forced the gallery to blockade the windows of the art gallery so that people could not see. Interestingly, it's state-controlled newspapers that were used to blockade the windows of the gallery. And of course, there's an interesting debate about the involvement of Zimbabwean state-controlled media in the Zimbabwean politics and also in issues of discussing things that are important to the public, because they tend to take the side of the ruling party or side of the government rather than telling the truth. So basically what my work was about.
Okay, so you said so much there, and I've got so many questions. I guess the language that I picked up was that you used the word postcolonial culture of violence. You know, and then you've gone on to say, in terms of state-controlled, your words are somewhat heavy, you know, in terms of, it sounds as if you're siding with Maseko already. And I'm wondering, is there bias then in your work, or are you, what kind of research are you doing? Is it ethnographic? What is it?
Partly, well, I met Maseko and I interviewed him, and we spoke about his work and stuff, and get the experience of his art in his house, because it was. But maybe to clarify, when I speak about state-controlled media in the Zimbabwean context, this is what you have. You have privately owned media, right?
Right.
The media are owned, newspapers and television and radio, they are owned by private individuals or by private companies that have no interest in politics, right? And then you have what we call publicly owned media. So the publicly owned media, they are sort of owned by each and every Zimbabwean who exists in Zimbabwe, even outside, as long as they are paying taxes, because taxpayers' money fund those media. So the government of the day controls the media on behalf of the people, right? So they are modeled along the lines of your BBC, which probably is the global-based example of what state-owned or government-controlled media are like. So when I say state-controlled, they are controlled by the state, but not owned by the state.
Right.
Right. And then again, the issues around control are all debate on their own, because it's open to abuse. And in Africa, there is conflation of the ruling party and the state or in the government of the day, because those are not differentiated. And again, really, as somebody who is in Ndebele, who comes from Matabeleland, I in a research like this, or in my work, I seek to speak for the subaltern, for the suppressed, and this is my scholastic duty as an academic to, if you call it taking a side, definitely yes, I'll take a side. But but I try to engage with issues in a much more sort of sophisticated and I don't know if I can say dispassionate, but I try to balance, and balance really is difficult to do as a scholar. But as I'm saying that it's my moral, intellectual duty to take the side of the suppressed and to amplify voices of the marginalized. And this is what my work really does. Largely, I look at issues from the perspective or from the view of the ordinary people.
Thank you very much for your response. I guess the next question is, since we've touched on the state and the ruling party, in your abstract, it states that ZANU-PF has refused to be accountable for what's happened in regards to the exhibition and everything else that you've slightly touched on. What do you think would be the best way to try and get their attention? I get it that, you know, we've got this paper, but, you know, someone needs to read it, essentially, who's set in the ZANU-PF seat, to then think, oh my gosh, that was a bit cruel, or that was a bit mad, or that was wrong, to choose the words there, and then think of an action plan. In your opinion, what do you think must be done so that, you know, a bit of the culture, this is something that is dire. I'm sure there's relatives who watch this and you know, and feel some sort of way. What do you think the best action should be?
It's as an academic, sometimes you get despondent, especially by being an academic in Africa, where academics are not taken seriously by the political systems, largely, you know. So sometimes we do our research in silos because there's not an impactful and engagement between governments and academics that is at least to me, at a desirable level, you know. Across the board. Do academics compose certain ministerial task forces and stuff, and do they come on board to advise governments and all that? In Africa, it's rare. If you look at the case of Kenya, for instance, I think it magnifies it better, where academics at some point to run away from Kenya because of the government of the day. Artists or novelists like Ngugi wa Thiong'o to run away, and you know, at one time the government was looking for a character in his novel Matikari, hunting him down, thinking that it was a character who lives, and so there's not that much engagement that, you know, I can write a paper and then say, oh, you're in government, read this paper and do something about it. There's not that engagement. And secondly, there are post-genocide or post-violent societies have to go through some form of, or through a ritual of cleansing, if we may say, and this is at different levels. During a genocide or during a conflict, people lose their relatives. People get to be buried in areas that, according to their families, they are not buried. And in many African contexts, death involves some spiritual. So death is not finality, as it were. It's some form of movement within the spiritual realms and stuff. To an extent that if somebody is not properly buried, the relatives believe that there's some spiritual implications. So what happens in the Kukuraundi genocide is that at one level, people were not buried properly, and there's need for that to be redressed. People were thrown down the mine shafts in tens, you know, or even thousands, and were unaccounted for. People were buried in shallow graves, and they were buried even piled one on top of the other and stuff. And that's not the proper way to do burials in an African context. So in some cases, there's needs for reburials. There's needs for the erection of commemorial plaques in instances where we know that there was a mine here and 50, 100 people were thrown in there, and definitely we cannot do DNA for reburials, but creation of memorial sites is important. So ZANU-PF and the government of Zimbabwe up to today is attempted to erase those memories and to also dismember any forms of remembrance, right? So you cannot easily do rituals where people were buried or erect plaques where people were buried as forms of remembrance. And these are either destroyed or people who try to do commemorations get even arrested. To an extent that during the period, in context of the paper that I was writing, a minister in the government responsible for reconciliation was arrested by the same government for participating in the commemorative activities. So it's really, for a lack of a better word, it's really a crazy space, right? and definitely you wouldn't expect any academic to engage with such a system that behaves like this, right? But what remains important is that we, as researchers, engage with the experiences of the people, and definitely some of our experiences, because for me to write on this genocide, as somebody who was affected is sort of therapeutic for me. It's therapy for me, right? In a context where there is no truth and reconciliation in place. Look up north in Rwanda, for instance. Around 94, the Rwandan genocide happens, and today they've sort of found redress, even though it's not perfect. There are systems that are dealing with this. There are museums where it could be seen from maybe from a certain perspective as shocking, where you get skulls in a museum just piled on top of each other and stuff. But at least that appreciation and remembrance of that these things did indeed happen, and the government is sort of helping in the healing process. So in Zimbabwe, there is no healing process that has happened. In Zimbabwe, there is no admission by the people responsible, some of whom remain in power up to today, the president heavily involved, right? There's no admission of any wrongdoing. There have been commissions set up to sort of try to find the truth. That has not happened. And therefore, people are sort of, the victims are sort of in a limbo, right? And the victims are not only the people who are affected, but even the generations that come afterwards. They have the burden of engaging with this memory that get passed on. And the lack of resolution actually informs some people's experiences of that genocide.
That is a lot. And I do have some questions, but I'm aware that we don't have that much time. So I think the question that I'll move on to is, Owen Maseko then still in prison, or has he come out?
No, he's not in prison. He's out.
He's out now.
What happened was his art was removed and put into his house, and he's not allowed to show it in Zimbabwe, but he can show it outside Zimbabwe.
So then why don't we petition for him to go and show it abroad, and those who want to see in terms of what's happened, they can go and see what actually happened. I think that'd be a good move, since you're a journalist.
He has been to South Africa.
Oh, has he?
Yeah, at one time I connected him to an organization in Kenya, and he went there. So he has been outside the country to showcase his art.
That's brilliant. I think the one thing that I've heard from you is the fact that, you know, you are the voice through writing this paper. But then I'm thinking, if it's just going to get shelved and no one's going to read it, how are you then the voice? Because the people that need to know about this stuff. I know you're on PhD Hard Talk, and this is going to go on YouTube now. People are going to listen to it. But, you know, what else do you do to ensure that people understand what's happened in terms of the genocide, and also in terms of current situ, what's not happening?
Yeah, so here and there we tweet about it, and we write some popular articles in the newspapers, blogs and stuff. But also in the academic sort of setting and setup, of course, our work gets to be cited by others in the scholastic community, as it were. I think this is as far as we can go. Of course, attending conferences and presenting these in conferences, because the issue of genocide really is a big thing. And there are conferences that focus, and organizations, academic organizations, that focus on genocide studies. So as a member of those, you know, we sort of highlight these issues. But issues of petitioning a Zimbabwean government, well, that's, I don't know. It's something that is extremely impossible, because, you know, when you're dealing with people who have reached an I don't care stage, right? There's no, they are irretrievably sort of set in their ways, that there seems to be no hope for rehabilitation on their part in terms of any engagement. So, but the most important thing is that we have to hope and wish that they do read these things, and that generations that are coming, and definitely there are some people after us that are not all that old, yeah, but there are people. There are people. You might be older than me. There are people.
There are people.
There are people who read, who confirm that they read our work, and especially young people. And interestingly, I've had students like from high school or even first year at varsity asking me to talk to them because they're doing a research project on Africa and maybe particularly genocide or things like that. So we get to them, and yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much for your response. We're going to move on to your tweets, but I think you mentioned something about the work that you do, that you use social media. I think you called it digital streaming. So do you think that's, hearing what you said, and the fact that you think, in your opinion, that it's his opinion, that ZANU-PF, like, they're not really hearing anybody, they're so stuck in their own ways? If you were to have an elevator pitch right now and you had 2 minutes to say something, to try and get their attention, to say, things need to change, essentially, what would you say? This is your opportunity.
Well, I think the most important thing that we have to notice is that in Zimbabwe, they've created constitutionally recognized structures like there's an organ for national healing or something along those lines. So those are supposed to be used and be useful in the communities, engage with scholars that have researched on this particular issue and get to know what they think and their experiences from the communities, and how they can actually get over this terrible dark spot in the country's history, and also try to do right, genuinely and openly to do right, so that people who have been affected by this can feel that sense of belonging to the nation, because they feel ostracized outside the nation. There are people who have struggled to get their identity cards and therefore failed to proceed in life in terms of going to school or even going to hospitals or what have you, right? Some people have ran away. I have a grandfather on my mother's side who left Zimbabwe for Botswana and he settled there, and he's still there up to today, right? He has never, and he was fighting in the liberation of the country, but he never got to experience a liberated country that he tried to liberate because of this, when he left being hunted down. So you need that kind of reconciliation to be genuine and truthful, so that you can rehabilitate both the people affected by this thing, this genocide, and every other generality of Zimbabweans who now know about it, right? Sometimes you get affected for knowing things, even though we never experienced, but you get to know what happened. It sort of affects you. And the fact that there's never been truth and justice is also problematic. So those things need to be delivered for a progressive country.